life is not fair. They lost loved ones.
I want to be a top career professional. I want to have a family. How am I going to make this work?
I was the daughter of immigrants, two people who came to this country with absolutely nothing. Parenting for them was about survival.
I don't think we're producing enough computer scientists and enough technologists.
I think we need national service, and I think you need it either at the conclusion of high school or university.
How many times should a child be hit in the head in sport?
The whole concept of being macho man is now proven to be ridiculous.
Why do ideas matter? They matter because they can be inspirational. They can introduce us to new ways of thinking. They matter because without new ideas, society can't move forward. But new ideas mean new discoveries and exciting new opportunities. Hi, I'm Sreenivasan on location at the 2013 Aspen Ideas Festival in Aspen, Colorado. In its 9th year, the festival will bring together hundreds of captivating speakers from around the world. They'll take on the latest big ideas on topics from finding common ground in our politically divided nation to solving our biggest economic challenges to the next generation of television. We'll bring you the best moments from the 2013 Aspen Ideas Festival over the next week, exclusively on World Channel. We talked with Aspen Institute President Walter Isaacson and Vice President and Festival Director Kitty Boone about what we can expect to see and hear this year.
This is the 9th year of the Ideas Festival, and it keeps growing. I think there's a real hunger or an eagerness in America for people to come together and exchange ideas, bounce ideas off against each other. Even in this world of the internet, where you think I can do all of this on social media, I can put ideas on Facebook, I can meet people in Google Meetups, it actually helps to be physically with somebody, taking a walk, sitting around a room with people and exchanging ideas.
This beautiful valley is sort of a retreat, and people tend to be able to come up here and relax and then also share. And so I think that we found over the years that convening large and small groups of people to talk candidly about issues in the world works in an environment like this, where offices are millions of miles away, where you don't have to actually think about work. You can think about what you do, and you can think about inspiring other people, and I think that's why this festival works.
The 2013 festival is just getting underway, with participants arriving and festival staff scrambling to pull together dozens of panel discussions that will take place around the Aspen Institute campus over the next week. We'll bring you the best highlights from this year's sessions here on World Channel. But tonight, we'd like to take you back for a look at some of the best of the 2012 Aspen Ideas Festival, with topics ranging from war and peace in today's world, concussions in football, and the agonizing process of deciding the worth of a human life. That's exactly what Kenneth Feinberg had to do as Special Master of the 9/11 Victims Compensation Fund. He has served as a mediator for several victim funds since then, from the Gulf oil spill to America's deadliest mass shootings.
He is overseeing victim compensation funds. And the one that we're most familiar with, of course, as we just mentioned, was the 9/11 Victim Compensation Fund. And it's important to remember, Kenneth Feinberg, that you were instructed by Congress in that respect, in the law that was passed right after 9/11, to employ the principles of tort law in deciding who got what.
That's right. Congress, 11 days after 9/11, passed a law. The law said that if you don't want to sue, if you don't want to go to court against the World Trade Center, the airlines, the security guard companies, Boeing that made the cockpit door, if you don't want to do any of that, go into this special fund, completely funded by the taxpayer, public money, tax-free. You don't have to. But if you want to, you will be paid very generously, without needing to hire a lawyer and go to court and try and win. And over 33 months, virtually everybody came into the fund. 98% of the eligible claimants came into the fund for deaths or physical injuries, burns, broken bones, arising out of the attacks.
And there were any number of fascinating questions presented by this, but among those, how far away from the, if you got your lungs scarred at 42nd Street from the smoke and the terrible fumes from the collapse of the World Trade Center, were you eligible for compensation?
No. Deaths were no problem in terms of proof. World Trade Center, airplanes, Pentagon. Physical injuries. Mr. Feinberg, I live in Jersey City. The World Trade Center plume, the fumes, wafted over the Hudson. I now can't breathe. Pay me. A lady on 96th Street, I was hanging up a painting. I saw from 96th Street, I saw the plane hit the World Trade Center. I fell over and broke my leg. Pay me. We said no. The statute didn't intend that.
And the statute also made it clear claims for mental suffering were not to be considered.
Congress made express in the statute, you cannot pay people who claim just mental damage. Now that was harsh. There were people that escaped from the World Trade Center without a scratch. Luck. With bodies jumping out of buildings, falling all around them, and glass and carnage. And they would come and say, Mr. Feinberg, I didn't get a scratch. God was on my side. But I can't get out of bed. Ineligible by law. Nothing I could do about that.
The only way that people could agree to this system was to understand that it was fair. And as I understand it, the only way you can convince them that it was fair was to speak with them.
Yeah, but you could never convince them. Fairness, forget it. Nobody that comes to see you with one of these programs, no matter what you do for them, no matter how much money you give them, do not expect them to say it's fair. Life is not fair. They lost loved ones, horribly disfigured injuries. They get money. Money is a pretty poor substitute, and they are bitter, they are angry, they are frustrated, and you don't expect anybody who's a claimant to thank you or to consider it fair. You're right, Neil, the public wants to know in setting up a program that the program is principled, that it's fair, that it's objective, that you're not biased, and that everybody's similarly treated the same. The only way to really appreciate the sound public policy that underlay the 9/11 fund, there'll never be another 9/11 fund, ever, is to appreciate it not from the perspective of the victim, but from the perspective of the country. I mean, you can't justify a 9/11 fund based on the status of the victims. You should have seen some of my emails. Mr. Feinberg, my husband died in Oklahoma City. Where's my check? Mr. Feinberg, my daughter died in the basement of the World Trade Center in the original 1993 attacks committed by the very same people. How come I'm not eligible? I don't think the 9/11 fund can be understood and defended based on who died or who was injured. It can be defended, and I defend it all the time. I think it was the right thing to do because the American people wanted to demonstrate to the world and to those nations harboring terrorism, you won't win. You won't win. We'll show you how we protect our own people. We'll show you how generous we are as a community of one. You won't divide us.
And in those circumstances, you were able in 9/11 and in other cases to meet with the victims individually and explain the process, why some things were different, why some things weren't. But in the BP case, this was not possible. And I know you held a series of town meetings.
BP, there were too many claims to meet with individuals. You have over 1 million claims. There's not enough time in the day. You can't have enough resources. So you're processing claims without giving the claimant, the fisherman, the shrimper, the oyster harvester, the hotelier, you're not giving them an individual opportunity to meet with me. It's tough. The program becomes distant, sort of antiseptic, anonymous. Whereas with 9/11, I met personally with 900 families who lost loved ones. And that ability to engage individual people who lost loved ones and to commiserate with them and to explain what the program's all about and to hold their hand. But it taxes you. It is so emotional and so debilitating that you worry about losing your mind, and you certainly worry about losing your objectivity.
Today, Feinberg is overseeing the One Fund, which will compensate victims of this year's Boston Marathon bombing. He says donations have been pouring in at a pace he's never ever seen, and payments to victims and families are scheduled to go out on July 1st. There's no doubt that Ken Feinberg has a challenging job, but let's turn next to the challenges of everyday parenting, and a session that asks a question working moms have been trying to answer for a long time now. Can women have it all?
More than 1 million people have come to Atlantic.com to read Anne-Marie Slaughter's piece entitled Why Women Still Can't Have It All. It is on track, this is pretty cool, Anne-Marie, to be the most read piece on the site. And I guess the question is, do you have any regrets about this title? And does anybody really have it all? Isn't it a misnomer that I think it's fair to say does set women in particular up for failure?
I think if I had an absolutely accurate title, it would be Why Working Mothers Need Better Choices to Be Able to Make It to the Top. So
don't blame it on the editor, Anne-Marie.
No, I'm not. That I think is what I'm trying to say. Interestingly, I had a focus group of women of my age and younger women, very talented women, who read this piece, and several of them wrote back and said, what you're saying is you can't have it all yet. And the reason I used have it all, and I understand a lot of the negative resonance, is that in my generation, I graduated from college in 1980, and the women ahead of me were really blazing trails. When I was in law school and my male professors would say the judge, the doctor, the lawyer, she, I'd jump every time because I didn't know a female judge or doctor. I knew one female lawyer. So having it all just meant having a career and having a family. And that's why it became the mantra that it became. I think it's clear to me that many people hear it differently now. They think it means having everything you want. None of us have everything we want. Men, women.
You can see that you're, quote, well aware that the majority of American women face problems far greater than any discussed in this article. What do you make of the criticism that these are high-class problems you're dealing with that only affect a certain segment, as you acknowledge in the piece, of the population, highly educated, affluent women, not certainly the ones struggling every day to hold down 2 jobs, single mothers who are trying to make ends meet? Should this really, in your view, be the focus of the national debate when so many women have it so much worse?
Well, as you say, I absolutely knew that. Obviously, given all the privilege that I have and the kind of job I have, I knew I was, as I said, I'm writing for my demographic. But here's how I think about it. There are many problems in this country, and there are many problems that I think we have to work on, and the availability of good daycare, of good schools, of good health care, all of the things that would make it better for all Americans, men and women, are hugely important problems. But I focused on one problem. We have all these women coming, we have 50% of women entering the workforce, more than 50% of women coming out of top schools, and yet as you go up, we have 20% in boardrooms and at CEOs and in government, in legislatures. Indeed, one of the few places you have women and men in equal leadership positions is academia, and that's because we can manage our own time. So if you say the problem is not enough women at the top, then you've got to write for the women who could make it to the top, who are, by and large, except for some unbelievably extraordinary people who pull themselves up, the women in this room, our daughters, my students. So if that's the problem, that I wanted to address, then I had to address that audience.
Are you worried, though, Anne-Marie, that the unintended consequences of this piece will sort of make an increasing number of women opt out? Because, you know, one of the things that you talk about in your piece is that we need to close the leadership gap by electing a woman president, 50 women senators, ensure that women are equally represented in the ranks of corporate executives and judicial leaders. And you say only when women wield power in sufficient numbers will we create a society that basically works for all women.
Look, there are a bunch of jobs where you aren't going to be able to balance it. And you have to know that if you're taking one of those jobs, as I did for 2 years, you're going to see a whole lot less of your kids. But here's the thing. I mean, obviously, if I thought that what I was writing would make women opt out, I would never have written it. And I wrestled for a long time. As I said at the outset, you know, my peer said to me, you can't write anything about your own struggles, about making different choices. You will discourage younger women. And then I went and talked to a group of Rhodes Scholars who are as accomplished as young women and men as could be. And I told them the truth. And the first response was, thank God, you know, you didn't give us just another you can have it all talk. And that's when I decided the women who've made those sacrifices, above all, were the women ahead of me who really, right? They worked in a completely man's world, and the things that they had to do to get there to open the doors for my generation
And deal with
were amazing. I think my generation has made a lot of progress. Many of us had kids late and experienced infertility issues and lots of issues where we now tell a lot of younger women, try to have kids before 35 if you can. That leaves this generation who feel very empowered, right? They're raised, as somebody said, they're raised as soccer players, you know, and told that they could do anything they want to do as little girls. And then they're getting there and saying, I'm just not sure how this is all going to fit. You know, I want to be a top career professional. I want to have a family. How am I going to make this work? And what I'm trying to say is I think the women's movement, I think, frankly, our society has gotten to a place where we can say, let's ask for what we need. I think along the way, we might end up with a more balanced life for all of us, and that would be a good thing. But we can ask for what we need and make it easier for, as I said, women to stay in the pool.
Achieving work-life balance would make many of us happier. Last year's parenting track at the Ideas Festival saw some of the best attended sessions on campus here at the Aspen Institute. As the festival gets underway tonight, it's hard to say which sessions will make headlines and generate buzz, but check us out on Facebook and Twitter to find out. Every year here, speakers at the festival ask what we can do to make our world and our children's world a better place. Now, let's hear a little more on that theme from an author who became famous as the Tiger Mom. What exactly are today's parents' goals for their kids? Happiness or success? Or can they have both?
Amy is a law professor at Yale. And she's probably, even though she's written 2 other best-selling books, she's probably best known for her Tiger Mom book. Amy, you're used to a little parental criticism.
Yeah, I noticed you're looking at me like...
Why do you think it is that you know, I know that you're speaking as somebody who wrote a memoir, and not as you like to make clear, not as a parenting expert. But why do you think it is that, given the way that we're so anxious about parenting and we all want to do it right, what do you think accounted for the response to your book and the way that you raised your kids?
You know, it's funny. I think that in a way, parental anxiety and the obsession with happiness and is in some ways a luxury. You know, so when I was the daughter of immigrants, two people who came to this country with absolutely nothing. And when the way they parented, they didn't have time to worry about happiness and parenting guides and classes. It was just, parenting for them was about survival. As you know, it was about, you know, teaching your kids to take advantage of every opportunity because they knew how hard opportunity was to come by. It was education, education. And I just got back from a couple weeks in China, and I see that now that there's more wealth there, actually, they now have time to be anxious. You know, the happiness, they're for the first time interested in this question of happiness. So, and I do think that the part of the response to my book is, well, what I like to say is I think my book accidentally tapped into two of America's deepest anxieties, fear of parenting and fear of China. I just like hit that. I just like hit that perfect intersection, just like exploded. When Lulu, my younger daughter, she's the one who rebelled and is the reason I wrote the book, but when she was younger, she was playing a little piece by Jacques Ibert called The Little White Donkey, which is a very cute piece, but it's very hard for young kids because the two hands play completely different rhythms and it was hard to do. And we were having one of our, she and I just have locked horns in the beginning, but we were having a big argument. She's like, can't do this, I won't do this. And I said, get back to the piano. And at one point, my husband called me aside and he said, Amy, has it ever occurred to you that maybe Lulu just can't do this? That she just doesn't have the coordination yet, that she's too young? And I said, oh, you just don't believe in her. Well, I don't care. You can be the parent they adore because you take them to baseball games and make them pancakes and water slides and all this. But I know she could do this. I'm going to go back. And I went back and we fought. And at a certain point, I thought, okay, God, my husband's right. She can't do it. And at that exact moment, her two hands came together. And then, interestingly, this kind of pride and joy set in. And I don't know how this relates to happiness or self-esteem, but she would not leave the piano. She just wanted to play it over and over and over. She couldn't believe that she could do it. So what I said in the book is, the reason I bring it up is my younger daughter Lulu has said a lot of mean things about me. She just texted one like 10 minutes ago. It's like, so it's not, but one nice thing that she has said is she tells me, even just recently, she said, Mommy, I remember that exact moment. That little white donkey moment, because when I'm sitting in a chemistry test in school and I feel a blank, I can't do this, I don't know this, I will remember that moment. That, there was once a moment when I felt, I can't do this, I know I can't, but just through hard work, just kind of keeping at it, I actually discovered I could. So I do think that, the best way for building confidence is actually not having somebody tell you over and over, but knowing in your heart that actually you once thought you couldn't do something, and by sticking with it, you learned that you could.
Success can come in many forms, and among last year's discussions on the economy, we heard from a man who's one of contemporary America's most interesting success stories. Starbucks CEO Howard Schultz made buying a cup of coffee an experience. But Schultz says his company isn't just about profits.
There are a lot of companies that believe that treating customers well and treating employees well is a core part of their mission. And you're on the forefront of that, but you are not the only one doing that.
True.
What has changed is that you, as a CEO, and Starbucks as a company, have taken this kind of radical next step, it seems to me, and said, it's not just about what happens inside our stores, but what happens outside in our communities. That does seem different to me. Well, and so what I'd like to ask you is, first of all, I'd like to get a feel for how that thinking came about, and then how it got put into practice.
Okay. Well, I don't want some of this to sound a little self-serving, but in order to answer the question properly, my own background growing up in public housing in Brooklyn, New York, and seeing firsthand the fracturing of the American dream and understanding sometimes the shame of being a poor kid certainly has stuck with me all these years. But in view of the platform that we at Starbucks have, I'm trying to ask the question and answer it in the affirmative. How can we use our scale for good? And talking to other CEOs, that we have a collective responsibility. If America is not doing well and there's a fracturing of the middle class, it's not good for our business. But that's not the reason. This is not about marketing. This is not about profitability. This is about citizenship over partisanship and recognizing that we can't wait for Washington. We have to do something. And I'm just saying to myself and others that I'm going to use the megaphone that I have with civility and respect to try and create some dialogue, because there's something wrong. The country is going in the wrong direction. It's not a criticism of the president. It's not a criticism of the Republican Party, but we all know there's something not right. Profitability certainly is a fiduciary responsibility of every public company, but I believe strongly that there's a new movement to recognize that we have to serve the communities in a way that just isn't about taking money, ringing the register, but about achieving the balance between profitability and a social conscience. Well, I think the catch term in the last 5 years has been CSR, corporate social responsibility. And CSR is not writing a check and issuing a press release about a contribution you just made to some community. The CSR group in a company must have a seat at the big table, like every other department and discipline. It has to be integrated into the company. When it's outside, it's an afterthought, and it's not real. And I agree with you. I have some cynicism myself when I see some of the things that come out. But I think most companies today recognize, just like HR and just like other disciplines, social and digital media is a new discipline, that there has to be an integration into the entire company in which corporate responsibility is part of what the company stands for. And I think that's happening more today than in the past. If a company, a brand, an institution shows up and does the right thing, that company is going to be accepted and embraced more often than not. Now, we're not the only company that's doing good things in America. But if you look at the companies that are, it wouldn't surprise you, probably wouldn't surprise you, those companies have had great performance. And I think in large part, the equity of the brand and the trust that people have in what we stand for has been elevated by these initiatives. But you should also understand, we're not a perfect company. We make mistakes, we have challenges, but we're going to constantly try and yield on trying to do the moral thing and manage the company through the lens of humanity.
Starbucks now has more than 20,000 stores in over 60 countries. Their stock price tends to follow the global economy. When consumers feel good about their finances, they're more likely to splurge on gourmet coffee. This week at the Ideas Festival and right here on World Channel, we'll hear about our biggest economic challenges, unemployment, budget deficits, and how the U.S. economy affects global markets. So how do you currently feel about our economic outlook? Let's hear the case for a positive point of view from one of America's preeminent economists, Lawrence Summers. He served not only as president of Harvard University, but also as U.S. Secretary of the Treasury.
In a time when the media and many of our polls focus on American decline and the public attitudes seem to suggest that Americans feel somehow we're in decline, what gives you so much hope? And I wonder if it has something to do with the fact that you're back, as you were in much of your career, in a great university. Do universities and the strength of our universities give you some of that optimism?
Let me start by saying this. I've spent much of the last 18 months since I left government traveling. And for all our problems, I would rather have the set of problems that the United States faces than the set of problems Europe faces, the set of problems Japan faces, or the set of problems any developing country faces. If you think about sclerosis and aging in Europe and Japan, if you think about the problems of riding the tiger in the emerging markets, I'd choose to have our problems. I choose to have our problems in part because I think they're less serious than those faced by Europe and Japan. And I'd also choose to have our problems because we have a remarkable capacity for self-renewal. You know, the phrase self-fulfilling prophecy is a standard one. The phrase self-denying prophecy is a less common one, but it is part of the genius of America that people become alarmed, and then responses come, and then problems are changed. We are blessed with remarkable strengths. In a world where economic strength increasingly depends upon technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship. If I say the names Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, and then I ask you for more Americans, you could all fill in a few more names. If I ask you to name non-Americans who belong on that list, you will, I would suggest, not have an easy time. And that says something about our country's capacity for renewal in cutting-edge sectors. At a time when we head towards a knowledge economy, somewhere between 15 and 18 of the world's 20 greatest universities are American universities. And the flow for those wanting to get educated is all to the United States. And that culture that those universities at their best bring, a culture that venerates the authority of ideas rather than the idea of authority, is something that makes the American system very well adapted to the much more open and flexible world that we are moving in. So yes, inequality is a terrible problem. Yes, our K through 12 system isn't what it should be. Yes, we do not now have the nation's finances on a sustainable path. Yes, there is a diminution in trust and faith in institutions, and I could give a longer list. But if you look at this moment, either relative to other countries or relative to a range of past moments in American history, I think it gives you a very useful perspective and grounds for somewhat more optimism.
U.S. technology companies have transformed the world and the global economy. Sessions on the latest technology developments are always a hit here at the festival, and this week we'll hear about everything from flying cars to the next generation of TV. Next up, Yahoo CEO Marissa Mayer, one of Silicon Valley's most powerful women, on why we need to get more young women and young men interested in careers in science and technology.
Let's talk about leadership. We're fortunate enough to have one of the leaders in Silicon Valley with us. I think one area that you've been quite passionate about in the past is women in technology. Mm-hmm. I'm an engineer myself by background, and there are not nearly enough women in engineering and technology, computer science, I think you'd agree, certainly in the upper echelons of Silicon Valley. What's the problem? Is it a supply problem or a demand problem? Can you tell us a little bit about your thoughts on this?
Well, my view overall is that it is a supply problem, but it's a different supply problem than a lot of people think.
Okay.
Just in general, I don't think we're producing enough computer scientists and enough technologists. Right? I mean, I think we're in a state
of
where...
either gender.
Of either gender. And so I think that, having just recently been in China, China graduates as many engineers every year from universities as we have in the workforce in the US. Right, so I think they graduate about 1 million engineers a year, and we have about 1 million engineers in the US. So we need there to be a lot more technical people overall.
But there have been, before people get too caught up with the China's going to beat us on everything, studies have challenged the quality of engineers. Not every engineering school is comparable, but broadly speaking, your point is certainly valid. There are other countries, Germany would be one of them, China, India, that place more emphasis on science and technology education. Will that be enough to solve the problem? Is there a glass ceiling, for example?
Well, I don't think there's a glass ceiling, but just to go a little bit further, more specifically on computer science, there are lots of people who are interested in sciences and math who don't pursue computer science. So the statistics look something like this. If you look at advanced placement courses across the US, each year about 200,000 seniors take the advanced placement calculus test. About 14,000 seniors take the advanced placement computer science test. And so if you assume that most people who are good at math might also be interested in computers, the question is, why are only 7% of those that are really advanced in math pursuing computer science? And we need to work to actually grow that overall pie, right? We should get to a state where there's 200,000 graduating seniors taking that advanced placement test. And they've also done studies on companies like Google and Facebook and Twitter and other companies that show that early exposure to computer science before you actually get to college is something that a lot of professional computer scientists ultimately have. Something like 95 to 98% of the software engineers at these companies have had at least done some coding by the time they graduate from school. So we need to get focused on that. And I do think making sure that that is palatable to girls in high school and make sure that there's not stigmas around it. I think that that comes from, one, people seeing how technology plays in their life every day, a multiplicity of role models, not even one role model, but just saying like, hey, there's all kinds of successful women in technology, and one's a jock and one is interested in the arts, and and like that you don't have to necessarily give up your personal interests. I think a lot of people think about the pocket protecting, pasty blue glasses, look in front of a computer up all night and say, oh, is that what I'm getting into if I get into computer science? And I think that's not true, and that's something we need to fight against. That said, I think we're finally starting to turn some of the tide here. Just last week, Stanford came out with their statistic that that computer science is now the biggest major. So for years it was economics or it was psychology, and so computer science as of this spring is the largest major at Stanford, which I think is a great sign. But my strategy would be to grow the pie overall, right? If we produce more computer scientists, if we produce more engineers.
And including people who are skilled in verbal skills, right? That's also another fallacy that only math geniuses should do this.
Yeah.
Where studies show people actually need good verbal skills to be good programmers.
The studies do show that, for example, programming ability, yes, there are some elements that are quantitative and mathematical, so some amount of math background helps, but what distinguishes good programmers from great programmers is verbal ability. It actually correlates much more highly to verbal SAT scores than it does to mathematical SAT scores.
In spite of the challenges of educating our kids to be ready for tomorrow's world economy, the U.S. is still an economic superpower. Our success can affect the success of the rest of the planet. But our next session asks the question, what does it mean to be a military superpower today? Let's hear from retired Admiral Mike Mullen, who served as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
I was recalling Harry S. Truman's statement, the president has the power to keep the country from going to hell. I wonder, do you feel the president has the power to keep the world from going to hell, or has the responsibility to do that?
I believe for the last 10 to 15 years that we are clearly out of the bipolar world, and we are much deeper into the multipolar world than I think we even realize, which from my point of view means that it's going to take leaders from many countries to solve the problems of the world, and that the United States can no longer do it alone. Our leadership is absolutely vital, and we are and will remain, in my view, a nation of huge consequence. But it's not just because the United States does anything particularly unilaterally now that would lead us to a point where, or we'd be at a point where everybody else will just follow. I don't think it's that simple anymore. I just think we have to be very balanced in our approach here. We are now entering a period of very tight budgets throughout the country, and certainly in defense. And there is a proclivity when we get into this environment is to sort of push it all to the new whiz-bang, particularly when the new whiz-bang can be much less expensive than some of the more conventional stuff. And I just approach this, my approach is different. I think in the uncertainty in the world that we're living in and the unpredictability that's out there, we're going to need to continue forward in a balanced way. Certainly drones and that technology have changed so many ways in which we fight, and will for the future as well. But there's going to come a time when our enemies have drones, and they will be very capable. So I think we need to, again, maybe step back a little bit and say, what do we really want to use this technology for? What happens when it gets into the hands of the bad guys? Because it's unbelievably both accurate and lethal, and it will become more so. And I've been at the table for the decisions, if you will, in terms of the terrorists who've been taken out, and I've supported that. But I think, and then I would argue drones being one issue, or ask to back up a little bit after 10 or 11 years of war, that we as a country kind of need to step back, if we can, and say, what has happened to us? And I'm starting to see this specifically about drones, but having a lively debate about, have we changed? Are our values still the same? We have to remain a principled, value-based country. We've always known we've dealt with pretty putrid individuals from a corruption standpoint. I'm not sure we can do that anymore. Honestly, I'm not sure that we can deal with some leaders that we absolutely know are corrupt to the bone, and then hold ourselves to who we are in the world that we're living. There's always been corruption. I'm not one that believes we can eliminate it. We shouldn't do that. But we ought to be pretty thoughtful about how we're going to deal with certain levels of corruption in certain people that we have precise knowledge about, because in dealing with them, in a way, we're sending messages to people they control that we're part of the problem, and they would look at it And these are the same people we're trying to help, and they get confused with the message.
This year's festival will continue the conversation on our safety and security, and will bring you the most interesting moments next week on World Channel, online at aspenideas.org or on iTunes with the Aspen Ideas to Go podcast. When it comes to U.S. military intervention, the burdens of war have been carried in recent years by very few Americans. Let's hear next from retired General Stanley McChrystal. He served as commander of U.S. forces in Afghanistan. McChrystal asks whether Americans have become disconnected from the concept of national service.
General, how would you assess the state of the American military right now? I remember when we were talking about the surge and putting more troops into Afghanistan, I was at a conference like this, and Colin Powell said, wait a minute, we're not talking about putting more troops into Afghanistan, we're talking about putting the same troops into Afghanistan. These wars have taken a toll on the U.S. military. Would you talk about that a little?
We've never done an extended war with a professional army like this. We've got a very professional army, and volunteer reserve, and they've done it a lot. So we're in uncharted territory. I would tell you it performs magnificently. The things that you do to support them, and you do a great job of it, are completely warranted. They are tremendous. But at the same time, we've got two concerns in my view. One, we're running it very, very hard, and at a certain point, you just can't expect it to go forever. The second, it's less than 1% of America is touched by this. Less than 1% is in the service, has a child in the service, a spouse in the service, a father in the service. We don't have the same up-close touch of this, and nor does the service have the same up-close connection with society that I think is important. And so for that reason, I think we've got to do things, consider a draft and whatnot, to try to get a better connection.
You know, there seems to be no real common experience for Americans anymore that we can all share. I mean, I'm old enough to remember World War II, and when everybody had an uncle or a father or somebody, everybody had a stake in it. And it saddens me now to know that I actually know people, good people, who don't know a single person in the United States military. My guess is we're not going to get a draft through. But what is your take on some sort of mandatory national service?
I am becoming a little bit more extreme on this each year. Right now, I think everybody 56 years old and younger ought to have to serve 2 years. I'm 57. No, what I really believe is I think we need national service, and I think you need it either at the conclusion of high school or university. I don't think young people would really fight it if it was fair, if everybody did it. You could only take a small part of that in the military, so I'm not talking military, I'm talking about all kinds of things. But I also think that the payoff is not what they do. It's not whether they go build roads and parks or that sort of thing. It's what you put inside them. Because once you have contributed to something, you have a slightly different view of it. And I think that it would be good to have a shared experience. If every person that's age 25 and older meets in a play area and the first question is, hey, where'd you serve? What'd you do? If that's the start of the conversation, I think it'd be really powerful. I think Israel gets amazing value out of that.
At last year's Ideas Festival, mandatory national service may have been the single most popular notion, one that has started a continuing conversation. General McChrystal recently made his case in a Wall Street Journal op-ed, and he returned to the Institute just this week for a new summit on national service. A recent Aspen Institute poll found that a solid majority of Americans favor some form of national service program. Another of last year's most captivating topics was the issue of concussions in football. In our next session, we'll explore hard hits and head injuries in America's most popular spectator sport. We'll start with an excerpt from the powerful documentary American Man, which profiles the struggles of former NFL running back Kevin Turner. Turner has been diagnosed with ALS, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease, which has been linked to head trauma in athletes. The film was screened at the festival and followed by a panel discussion that asked whether football as we know it should continue.
May of this year, I was diagnosed with ALS. And although it's hard to say. Although it doesn't seem like it, because it doesn't affect my legs yet, there's a lot of me that doesn't work quite the same.
He's probably had a football in his hand since he could hold one.
He just gave it everything he had every game.
He took the talent he was given, and then he worked harder than everybody else, and he achieved his goal. I mean, that's how he got where he got with the NFL.
Go, attack it out.
You know, I started playing organized football when I was 5 years old. My dad and one of his friends coached me, and we had a little group of us that he coached for 5 years, just like I did my older son.
I didn't know that was Kevin Turner coaching out there until I saw his arm.
Yeah,
that's who it is.
That's my son.
Oh, it is? That's a shame. That's a shame.
Yeah, it's tough.
I had a good friend of mine, played basketball at Georgia Tech when I was in Atlanta, died of ALS.
Yeah, it's an awful disease.
It's a debilitating thing.
It is.
I think you know what the prognosis is and all that stuff. And
I had a guy that works with me that had it, died of it last year. He was older. Yeah, not as good a shape as Kevin, but he went.
Yeah.
How critical is this issue of assuring parents that this is a game that's safe for their kids?
That's advancing the situation. For many years, the NFL had been in denial, and there was a saying, this is not football related. And because of some great work with the New York Times, certain reporters and certain medical people proved that a lot of these things are football related. So now the league is addressing it in a way that I think they should address it. And I think because of that, in a couple of years, the platform will be totally different. But the denial has been very hurtful to a lot of players because they did not get the proper treatment at the proper time. The coaches did not have the knowledge of not to put a young person back in a game after they have received a concussion. The whole concept of being macho man is now proven to be ridiculous.
What do you think? I mean, can football be saved? You have, tell us your relevance to this topic.
I don't have an answer for that. I mean, I have to answer it as a physician, which is there's a cardinal rule in medicine between you and your physician, which is I have to inform you of the risk, and you have the right to make the decision. We're not informing all of our Division I athletes of this risk, and that's the first step. And I agree with Jim. I mean, I can't answer that question yet. We're working hard to answer it. But until then, I think the best thing that we can do is let people know there is a risk, and you have to make that decision as parents.
I think one of the largest things is changing the culture, like Mr. Brown said, of the tough man, just keep going if you can walk, and you know which side to get on, keep going. And that's kind of how it was when he was playing, how it was in the 90s. And, no coach out there wants somebody to come out for a series or a couple of downs when they need you. And you say, I just got, I'm seeing stars. I got to take a couple plays off. Can you see my finger? Get back in there. So that culture of just keep going no matter what the cost has got to be changed. It'll take, I think, a couple of generations for that to happen.
there was something that I found after I shot this film, and I just want to read this for a minute because it speaks to the culture, and not just the way the game is played on the field and the way that the guys should play it. This was a letter to the editor at Sports Illustrated, and it was in response to an article that said, here's what it said. The first sentence in your sub-headline from your story about the LSU-Alabama game last fall reads, "An instant classic it was not." I have to ask, what game were you guys watching? That was the most intense, hard-hitting, and exciting football game I've seen in a long time. True gridiron fans know that defense and collisions are what make football great. Pads crunching, bodies colliding, ground and pound. That's what we live for. Those are fans. And if that's all they appreciate, and that's what they see on Saturday and Sunday, and they don't see Monday, and they don't see Monday 20 years afterwards, how can they understand what these guys are going through? And that culture has to change as well, not just the way the coaches and the players act on the field, but the fans and the way we appreciate the game.
So does anybody have any confidence that fans who have become aware of this topic will feel a little more uncomfortable cheering for that big hit on Sundays because they know there is a consequence?
My original problem with the NFL was not that the game was dangerous, it's that they were lying to the players and the country about what the consequences were. It's all about informed consent. And now that we are at informed consent, and now there's a poster in the locker room that says that this may cause early onset dementia, then it comes down to the players bargaining through the PA with the NFL about what level of safety they're comfortable with, because we don't stop people in America from doing dangerous jobs. You know, cops, firemen, soldiers have much more dangerous jobs. We get paid far less. So the NFL doesn't have to go away. And frankly, the NFL has gone really far. I'm not sure how much further they need to or will go. But the question really becomes, what about people who don't have informed consent? And that's everybody under 18. And the question then becomes the premise of how many times should a child, you always have to go to evolution, how many times should a child be hit in the head in sport? I mean, now that I don't play anymore, I realize I don't get hit in the head very often. And high school players will be recorded taking 2,200 hits to the head in a year. How many people here have been hit in the head one time this year? Raise your hand. Okay, a few people. How many people here were hit in the head 25 times this year? None of you. But your children, if they played football, got hit in the head 1,000 times.
So what are some of the reform measures that are in place right now, and how effective are they? I mean, talk to me a little bit about the hit count.
Sure. The number one thing you can do to make youth football safer is to lower the exposure, and over half the exposure comes in practice. So what we've been pushing for, and the NFL was actually the first to move on this. They can only have 1 day of hitting a week in practice. And the Ivy League said, all right, 2 days is the max. Pop Warner then went to 3 hours a few weeks ago. So no more, they went from 10 hours a week of kids colliding to 3 hours. That's gonna dramatically reduce it. And one of the things that we are pushing through Sports Legacy to advance that discussion of less is more is something called a hit count. Basically, now that we have sensors and helmets, we can count how many times people are hit. And we saw what happened in baseball with pitch counts. There was a little bit of evidence that said you could wear out your elbow if you throw too many times. And so Little League then adopted this program where if you're 10 years old, you can only throw 60 times. And if you're 12, you can throw 70 times. And you're mandated 3 days of rest to let your elbow recover. And we sat around and said, gee, I think your brain's more important than your elbow.